Hi, welcome to the Launch Lab podcast. We are with our guest, Patrick, who is a fellow member of the Launch Lab community, founder of Joy. And we are gonna today dive into the topic of the pre-startup work, before the startup, and all the ground and legwork. And I hope Patrick is gonna help us get some insight on this kind of unknown path of the founder, but I would say one of the most important. So Patrick, can you tell us a bit more about Joy? How did you come up with the idea and tested it?
Yeah, so Joy, our mission is to add 10 years to life expectancy by addressing the non-medical determinants of health. So big picture, 80% of our health is determined by non-medical factors.
Okay.
So, for example, your postcode or your zip code has a greater influence on your health than even your genetic code.
Really?
More impact, yeah. It's got a bigger impact. And so we know that given that there are so many health issues, I'll give you some, for example, talk about like obesity, cancer, dementia even, cardiovascular disease, mental health illness as well. So much of the disease burden, I suppose, in many of the Western health systems are driven by non-medical factors. So your lifestyle is massive in that, but also the social determinants, so your housing situation, poverty, etc. So our mission is to add a decade to life expectancy by addressing those non-medical factors, and we do that through social prescribing, and that's where a patient or a person receives a intervention that's going to help them to address those non-clinical factors. So e.g., maybe you want to lose some weight, you might be referred into a group that's going to help you to manage your weight. Maybe you're struggling with your mental health as a consequence, let's say, of like a relationship breakdown. Rather than an antidepressant, maybe you get plugged into a local community group that's going to help you sort of build up your mental health and find your feet again.
So how do you execute, understand basically your mission and what you're trying to achieve is add life expectancy? How do you actually do that?
How does it actually work?
Yeah.
Like in terms of like the software and tech?
Because I would like to live maybe 10 years longer, but so shall I just email you, hi Patrick, can I live 10 years longer? Like,
Yeah. No,
how does it work?
No, essentially the way it works is so our software is provided to the health system. So most of our customers...
For the NHS?
Yeah, the NHS.
Okay.
Yeah, most of the users and the use cases are really in primary care, in GP surgeries. So the system helps like three main things. First, it helps identify the patients that might benefit from these referrals. Secondly, helps them to match them and connect them into a non-medical service. And then thirdly, it helps to like track and trace that patient journey and then record the ROI.
So it's very for specific type of customer or patient, if I can use the right word. It wouldn't be for someone like me.
It's probably not for everybody.
Yeah.
It's typically, I think so in terms of like the adult population, approximately 40% of adults have one long-term health condition.
Okay.
And there's around 9% of adults have a mental health condition and a long-term health condition. And probably that sort of, the combination of that makes you quite a good fit for a social prescription.
Yeah, I do like the fact that you use a lot of numbers and figures, which mean that you did a lot of research. And I wanted to focus today with before the startup part. It's an area for kind of unknown for a lot of founders, like so kind of the groundwork. I think a lot of them are advised to just do it, but in the end, those kind of figures you need to do some preliminary groundwork. And I know that we mentioned you spent kind of roughly 2 years talk us through about like your pre-startup journey, how all the kind of groundwork, and just explain a bit more on like the 2 years journey. What do you mean?
Yeah, so I suppose like just sort of trace back the context then of me. So but prior to starting Joy, I worked as a did strategy consulting. I was an innovation consultant, which is a horrible term, but I had a good job essentially, and so I had this strong desire, almost burning desire, to launch a business that was like a tech for good business. So I really wanted to do that. That's kind of been in my DNA, I suppose, from early doors. So But the key thing when starting a business is that you need to test your commercial assumptions. Like, it's really hard to get people to pay for something. And so I had a good job, I was earning like decent money, and so the idea of like leaving that and then going all in into a business, I needed to personally feel a level of confidence that I was doing more or less the right thing. So you're quite right to say that I spent like the best part of 2 years really trying to get my head around like, what is the value proposition? What is it actually going to be? Feeling quite confident that the business that I was going to start was going to be wrapped up, I suppose, in a value proposition and built around a value proposition that people would actually pay for. And so in those first couple of years, I was not running Joy as a full-time endeavour. I did it like weekends and evenings and spare time. And it was all about me trying to improve and iterate the concept, the idea, the opportunity space prior to launching and going all in on Joy. And what I would say is, in those early days, the number one reason a business fails, a startup fails particularly, is that no one buys their stuff. That's the biggest problem, right? 44% of startups fail for that reason. It's by far the biggest reason. And so what I did was, it was like, okay, my number one focus is to test the commercial assumptions. Getting people to pay for something, like I said, is really difficult. So you should concentrate as long as possible, really, and take your company and your startup and your initiative as far as you can go to test those ideas. Prior to even like writing a line of code, for instance, can you develop a bit of a pipeline and a sales pipeline prior even to having a product? That's what I really did for the first couple of years.
So how do you do that practically, like in your case of, because it's health tech, isn't it? Mm-hmm. How do you validate that people are willing to pay for something without writing a single line of code? In your case, what was the steps?
I think key thing is the different sectors and different types of businesses will have different like approaches. But mine was a good one, because I was going into the health space with having never worked in the health space before myself. So I didn't have any like tailwinds around a network or whatever. I've never worked in a GP surgery prior to this. So literally the way that I did it, it was a lot of cold. So I updated a bit of LinkedIn to explain that this is sort of initiative that I was working on, had a like one-page website at this point, and then just got in touch with possibly interesting customers and potential customers and the sorts of roles and people and personas that I'd want to be speaking to. And then, messaging them, emailing them, trying to meet up with them and discuss my idea and get their feedback. Is this the sort of thing that's helpful? Would it solve problems that you're facing? And then often, in the early days, that's why it took 2 years, no, this isn't a problem for us. Or that's kind of a problem, but it's just not that important. Or in fact, we already have a tool that does that already, so would it link in with that? And you'd be like, well, taking as much of that insight as possible, and then you would do an increment. So then it would improve. So next time you'd speak to someone, it'd be like, oh yeah, it's going to work like such and such. It's going to tap into these existing workflows. It's going to solve these problems. And then you'd find that as long as you kept listening and validating, and I probably over like 2 years had like 30, 40 different customer like interviews like that. And what was interesting is that the nature of those conversations changed from like a validation into more like, so when can I use this? Is it ready? How much does it cost? Like you'd find that it would move on, and you realise you're starting to hit onto the right areas.
I think you're a perfect example of, have you read the book, The Mom Test?
No, I haven't.
You are the personification of this book. It's literally, the whole book is advocating of what you just did. Start with cold communication, test your ID. If it goes well, then it's sliding from, are you is it something that I can help you with, to how can I help you with you? And would you be willing to schedule a next call? And would you be willing to pay for a trial period? So it's literally the whole book. It's, I think you would perfectly embody the whole idea of this book. I find it fascinating when you said that you were testing the idea without writing a single code, because I think, and that's also my take, the only way to win between like startups is who has a better ground on reality. And I think that most founders create ideas in their mind, like they solve imaginary problems. And I find it very clever from you to like, getting out of your like whatever you thought and just going on the field. And I must assume that you had been through lots of rejection, right? But yet, can you share a bit more about this kind of journey? Because you are talking about more the bright side of like, oh, I had this idea, tested it, but tell us about more the ugly side of like all of those rejected phone calls or like all of those. Well, how did you overcome that and the slow moment where you must have felt like there is no demand for whatever I'm doing, I'm just wasting my time, especially in the pre-startup phase where you don't have any money, you're just like spending your time without any guarantee.
Have three things to say on that. So the first thing to say is it's fantastic when you kill a bad idea.
Interesting, yeah.
That you haven't spent money building. What can you imagine the alternative? You don't hear that early. You spend loads of money and time and effort building something, and then you find out once you built it. So in that early stage, like hearing that this is a bad idea, and it's very rare that people are hostile and impolite to you. They're just, lukewarm to your idea. But killing a bad idea that's like you should flip that, because that's fantastic, because you've saved yourself so much heartache later. You want to kill and
so you want to welcome rejection.
Yeah, you do. And the second thing is also learning never ends. So my ability now, like Joy's obviously kicked on like a lot further since those days, but every day is a school day. My ability to learn, my team's ability to learn is going to be directly relational to like the level of success that we have. So you're always learning. So you need to embrace it and have a slight like childlike naivety to the way that you're doing things, and be prepared to be told and listen and understand things. So it's a good thing. So and ultimately the third part of that then is around like resilience. So you can't be the sort of person who gets upset when someone says your idea isn't very good. You just won't go very far. So you need to be resilient, and if someone says this isn't very good, then you should welcome that feedback gladly and be like, I'm great, thank you so much for like sharing that. Like, what's not great about it? Is there anything in it that's bad? Oh, that is good, sorry. Unpack it a little bit, and it's a great opportunity to learn. Again, like I say, if you're being patient, I suppose, and you're not in a hurry just to get something built and out there, if you really take your time to test the commercial assumptions, you should anticipate gradual evolution / massive revolution of the sort of business and product that you're going to end up building. Like Joy is nowhere near what I thought it might be when I first started that journey. It's completely different now to what I started out with. Same big themes, like adding a decade to life expectancy, addressing these non-clinical issues, but like how it's going about doing that is completely different to what I originally anticipated it would be.
I would like to now focus a bit more on the switch you had to make at some point from, oh, it's just some cold calls and no code, to actually having to develop something. So I think there is, it's not really a like yes or no. It's not like we have a product or not. I guess it's more an MVP stage where you're implementing some part, some non. Like, how do you prioritize features of your MVP? By that, I mean, you must have heard like different assumptions from different clients, and how do you determine which features are important, which one, like, how do you filter all of these informations? Yeah,
so I suppose the way that you do that does change as your startup like gains traction. So in the very early days, my main criteria was the commercial lens. So the commercial lens is, I need to get something that people are going to pay for. Mm-hmm. So we would then prioritize the features, the actual functionality that then got developed based upon features that people would pay for. So solving or delivering workflows, let's say, that were the most administrative or the most difficult, whatever. So that's how we focused it originally, was primarily on like the commercial value of the feature. As we have got, now we're a lot further on than those days. Now we have to balance, you are quite right, when you have lots of users, lots of customers, certain things are really important to somebody and certain things are really important to everybody, and you have to sort of, there is a bit of an art and as well as a science around that. The lenses that we look at now are commercial still, like is this a feature that people is going to help either increase the price point or make it easier to take to market, or is it going to improve retention rates? That's like the commercial lens. Then you've just got like basic user value and like happiness with the system and like day-to-day use. So there's like we get a lot of like, I'd say, relatively incremental feedback, but just around like how the platform is designed, some basic things that just make it a little bit more user-friendly and intuitive to use. And we actually put a lot of stock actually on some of that feedback, because we want to make something that people love using and want that to be really helpful for us. But also the one that now gets introduced, something that didn't exist in the early days, is more the strategic value. So I have, and as a team, we have like a strategic vision for where we want Joy to go. And in that vision, we've got like a roadmap of different product development areas that we want to be going after. But also, our customers also have a vision for it, and sometimes that doesn't quite marry up. So sometimes a customer might want you to build a new adjacent product, say, to solve an adjacent problem, but that's not strategically aligned to what our organisation is about. So we now look at things around like, our product development also needs to incorporate functionality and features to really, for us at the stage we're at now, is to try and build like a really, have an organisation that has a huge impact, that helps millions of patients in multiple countries around the world. And so when we view our product roadmap through that lens, then sometimes there'll be products that are maybe we would have built a few years ago that actually we kind of go, no, we won't be doing that because it's almost distracting.
So you would say the way you prioritized your MVP was, at the beginning, was only a commercial lens. Which one would make you generate revenue?
It's probably the main one. What does it really need to do?
Right.
What problems does it need to solve? And what is the most small, straightforward, simple, easy, lowest resource minimum, let's say, product to deliver that.
Does this approach solve I guess in some way it must have solved the money issue where you are like living, as you mentioned, your comfortable position, jumping in a entrepreneurial road, and I assume there must have been a period where, you need to take this risk of leaving everything and going into the unknown. Would this approach was sufficient for you to have enough money so you could jump on it saying it's fine, I've got enough revenue for Joy? Or did you have to still invest some of your own money in?
Yeah.
Do you understand my question?
I do understand your question. Basically the question was, could you get the MVP to a level where it was income generating to a point that you could earn money from it sufficient to...
Yeah, is it when you decided to jump on Joy, or was it before that?
No, so good question. So when I was looking at what should we build and saying it needs to have a commercial element to it, it wasn't because the commercial element was it needs to fund the business. The commercial element was just that we need to be confident that the type of product that we're going to build could be viable. It doesn't need to be viable from day one, it just could be viable. So let me just unpack that a little bit more. People didn't pay a lot for it in the early days. It wasn't It was not, something that like one customer would fund an entire team. What was more important was that we had evidence that people would pay something for it, and that there'd be enough scale behind that to create a business. Does that make sense?
It does.
So you don't have to like go, all right, this one customer, this one MVP needs to fund my expenses, my team's expenses, ... thing. It was actually, what was really important was that I'm testing the commercial assumption. They might pay a very, a relative, depending on what your business is, right? If you're doing like a B2C play, it might be £1, like it could be tiny. If you're doing a B2B play, it's probably like a slightly larger ticket size, but still probably not enough to fund an entire organisation based on one customer. Key thing is, do I believe that this is reproducible across, a wider market area? And if that's yes, great. Just getting 1 or 2 customers lined up who are actually going to pay for it, even if that doesn't cover or really touch the overall business costs. What you're demonstrating is you've got market traction there. And then if you want to raise money or get investment or whatever, if you can demonstrate market traction, that's a really good evidence point to then go and get the capital required to go and build out what you want to build.
Have you used this market traction to raise money?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I didn't raise money. I had I had a sales pipeline of people who would basically say, yeah, we want to use this and we're going to pay money for it. Had that all lined up prior to raising like equity finance.
How much did you raise at first?
Yeah, we haven't. In general, we've kept things like relatively like bootstrapped, I'd say, and it's been a mixture of. We raised a bit of grant funding. That's a good source of capital. We raised a bit of like equity finance as well, but compared to like a lot of companies at our stage, probably like a lot less. Probably won't say how much, but like like not, we've used EIS and SEIS routes to raise.
So you would put yourself in like seed level?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Did you wait to have the funding of your investor before quitting your job?
No.
So you quitted, pushed on it, and then you get the...
I quit the job. My time to jump off was when I had a committed customer. When it's ready, there's money here. That I got to that level of certainty, got to that level, and then it was like, okay, it's kind of now or never, because now I just need to get behind this and build it out.
Looking back at this journey on the pre-startup phase, is there anything you would do differently in the early stage of Joy?
Honestly, I would say the way that I've done it is really good, and if people want to reproduce that's really good. There are 2, in hindsight, things that could be different for Joy. So the first one is, given that I hadn't ever worked in health, and it was quite clear early on that GP surgeries and like primary care would be a really important area. Something I could have done, and I've reflected on, is I could have left my job, maybe started working in a GP surgery, perhaps on a part-time basis, myself, to actually gain some of that expertise and experience whilst starting the company. So that's something I could have done. I didn't do that, but I do think that having that could have been helpful at times. The other thing is probably around like raising money, in that I've always, like so far, I've been very like resourceful and like tried to bootstrap really the companies as far as possible. And I think that there are times when that approach actually isn't the right approach, and actually it makes sense to like invest heavily and like shift up a gear. And I think something I'm reflecting on is the way that I started Joy, like hired people. Some of those things perhaps we could have made a lot more progress sooner had we raised a bit more money earlier. In hindsight, I think we could have brought forward some of the activity forward by like 6 months to 12 months, say, because maybe I was shooting for quite a high level of certainty, and I think was possibly unnecessary.
So it was kind of, you were maybe overcautious. Is it
Yeah,
what you're trying
I think
to say?
possibly in the early days I'm naturally, when you're doing something like starting a company, it is an enormous risk as well. So I think I try to be quite considered and calculated in my approach to like running the company and being resourceful and being, stewarding the resources that the company has and like as wisely as possible. And sometimes there is a balance between being bold and risk-taking versus being cautious. That is a balance.
Last point I wanted to talk about is on the team.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a co-founder?
I'm a sole founder.
How did you, at the early stage when you were like preparing for the startup, considering the team aspect, how did you see yourself? Like, is it like, were you looking for a co-founder, didn't find one?
Mm-hmm.
Where you decided that you wanted to go just on your own? And also, how did you kind of planned the team building aspect?
Mm-hmm.
Did you do that at the early stage, or did you wait for the funding to start actually hiring? When did the shaping of your team started to?
A really good question.
Can you just remind to the audience how big is your team?
Yeah, there's like 20 of us in the team. Yeah.
All full-time or?
All full-time, but like
so it's
not all office-based, but like yeah.
So you got.
It's grown. Yeah, it's grown. So team building there's like 3 reasons why company fails. 1, no one buys your product.
Yeah.
That's the biggest one. Second one is that you run out of money. Third one is that you haven't got the right team. And the second and third one is a trade-off, right? So if you want really good people, it costs a bit more money, so you might run out quicker. Okay, there's a bit of a tension there. So team building. So yeah, I started Joy alone. That's really true. When I first started Joy, paid myself £10 an hour. That was the Joy rate, and was really lucky because I knew people. Basically, I had like friends and developed like some good relationships with people who were like, yeah, do you know what? I'm happy to do like a day a week, earning like a really terrible salary of £10 per hour. Like really just like helping me out a little bit. That was massively helpful. I did want a co-founder. I really did want a co-founder, and I think I actually tried on 2 occasions to have a co-founder, but it just wasn't that important to them. So our priorities weren't quite aligned on that. So for me, this was like something really vitally important, would kind of be something that I would sacrifice other things for. Whereas we weren't on the same page in terms of like how important it fed into the wider priorities of life. And that's why like I started Joy really without a co-founder. But what I've been super lucky with in building the team is that we've got a really excellent team. And like early on, a couple of people who I'd previously worked with in my like strategy consulting days like joined, which is the best thing that's ever happened to the company, because even though I am a sole founder, there's like a couple of people in the business who are probably the closest thing to having a co-founder when you are a sole founder possible.
I find it very interesting, your journey, especially on this pre-startup phase, because it looks like you are very strategic in your approach. It looks like you are seeing it more a chess game more than anything else. And it also looks like, it feels like you are very grounded in reality. Like it feels like you're very ambitious driven, but still manage to like have a good ground on reality. And I know that this is kind of the tension where it may happen with founders, like they have big dreams, big hopes, but they're not really grounded on reality. Like their starting point is like more imaginary. Yours is like more you started from, like as you said, the £10 an hour rate, and you are very practical, but you knew where you were going. And I find it, I just hope that our audience is taking as much joy listening to your journey as I do. Is there any last advice or points you would like to share to our audience?
Yep.
Especially on the early stage.
Yeah.
So
love to I can share maybe a couple of things which I think would be helpful for people considering starting a business? So the first thing is generally, here's my approach anyway, is like a business, you want to start with solving a problem. So be solving a problem. Now there are other businesses that don't start by solving problems. They're like fashion, for example. It's like a different sort of business. But the business that I'm like starting with Joy is a problem-solving business. So you want to solve a problem, and when going about your ideation, you want to be thinking about like how's this going to solve problems, and that really is your value proposition. So if I trace back those early days about validating and trying to test my commercial assumptions came from the fact that we were solving problems that people would be prepared to pay for a solution that does that. That makes sense. So that's the first part. Second part is when you're in the very early stages, you don't have hardly any resources at all. So you're very, very constrained. And there's a bit of a scarcity of everything. So that can be debilitating for some founders and some budding founders because, oh, I need money, or I need this, or I need that. So the trick is to just think about what have you got at the moment, what's in your hand, what can you actually do, straight, you as an individual without doing too much else, what do you have, what tailwinds, I suppose, do you actually have, and then concentrate on those. So I did like consulting, so consultants are like quite good at like slide decks and stuff, so I did like a lot of my early days were like with slides and showing people and communicating my problems in terms of like a slides and like a PowerPoint deck, for instance. That was like me using maybe what I had to offer. Does that make sense? So the first thing is like immerse yourself in problems. Second is just try and get going based upon what you've already got in general. And I do really acknowledge what you said around sort of vision and then pragmatism.
Yeah.
And again, as a founder, I think one of the skills you need, I call it like head up and head down thinking. So there are times to be strategic and there are times to be pragmatic, and you need to be able to be a person who's really comfortable in the very, very detailed, and then be able to flip and go into something that's like, how are we going to make something international, say, and then how are we going to make this little bit of the workflow work for this user? And you need to be able to toggle, I suppose, between the strategic and then the pragmatic. And it's like a skill that you can work on.
Well, then I guess we're going to wrap up on that. Thank you very much, Patrick, for being a guest on our LaunchLab podcast. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next week for our next episode.